So we have to look at how powerful those beliefs are. If we can believe collectively that we're entering a beautiful age because we as humans are going to create it, we're going to make it so, then we have exactly the fuel we need for getting to some of those predictions back in the 60s where people would love each other's and they would put flowers in their gun barrels. And I like that one particularly. But basically, it's not going to just happen for you. You are the ones who are bringing it forth. And it's really important to know this. But you're not going to get punished if you don't do it right the first try. I think it's going to take a number of tries, but there's not going to be any punishing force.
Kathlyn Kingdon, a longtime spiritual teacher whose 42-year partnership with Master Djwhal Khul, fondly known as Master DK, has offered profound guidance to seekers around the world. She is the founder of the Rocky Mountain Esoteric School and has led hundreds of retreats and workshops, both in the U.S. and internationally. With a rich background that includes psychotherapy, music, and business, Kathlyn brings a grounded yet expansive perspective to spiritual evolution. Her new book, Whatever Happened to the New Age, is available on Amazon. Welcome so much to the show, Kathlyn.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, and we're going to have a really nice journey together. So there seems to be a lot of mystery around the Mayan calendar ending in 2013, and some thought it was the end of life as we knew it. What was the significance of this timeline, and how did it affect humanity?
Well, I don't know if the calendar itself affected humanity, except that it gives us a real understanding that there was a time when people thought in much larger cycles, in much vaster periods of time. For instance, the Mayan calendar, basically based on a number of what are called baktuns, which are periods of 2,500 years. And these correspond roughly to how in the West we see the progression of astrological cycles. So I think what I think about so much is how, with the advance of technology, our focus has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and more defined into the realm of minutiae. And that's important. We learn a lot from studying atoms and looking at the subatomic level and all of that. But on the other hand, maybe we miss the bigger picture sometimes. And I think certainly if you are involved at all in Hindu astrology, they see times passing in millions, maybe 300 million years for one epoch or one age. We don't even know how to think about that for the most part here in the West. And so the Mayan calendar really was what brought, I think, to many people an awareness of this shift from one planetary cycle into another, which we know is going from the Piscean age or the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. But this the Mayans, and this is an ancient civilization. Of course, they were phenomenal astrologers and astronomers, and so they saw in terms of these huge pictures, these really big packages of time. And I think it's good for us to encounter that today, because it's very easy to get so focused on the minutiae or the tiny pieces of life. What does today look like? Oh, I had a terrible day today. We're not seeing it even in the context of one measly year, let alone a huge astrological age. And so I see that Jose Arguelles and his interpretation of that calendar, nobody had really broken the code before him. And of course, he was a channel too. I believe Paco Votan was the being he channeled, and basically helped him decipher the code and get the arithmetic or the mathematics correct about how all of this works. And so I think it is valuable for us to say that without his work, we might be blundering through, not really knowing that much about this happening, which is entering of a new planetary cycle. He brought that to us, and even though way back in the 60s, we were all singing about the dawning of the new age and so on, we didn't know what it was about. It was just a good idea. Peace. We're going to have peace. I think that's possible. We're certainly not there yet. But basically, and of course, Master, who basically was the inspiration behind this book, really talks about life in terms of what we're all learning. and how much we need to learn from each other. And to do that, we kind of have to open up to each other and not pay so much attention to our own tiny little realm, because it is in the scope of the cosmos. You can't even find one human life. It's just so amazingly tiny compared to this huge expanse. And so it seems to me, if I understand what Master is saying in his teachings, is that we really need to look more to the big picture. We really need to be more aware that this cosmic process is just that, something that involves an entire cosmos. And our little solar system is so tiny in the scope of the cosmos that, we tend to see it kind of out of proportion. In fact, the whole solar system is moving so rapidly. I forget how many thousands of miles per second we're traveling. We're not even aware of it. And we tend to focus so much into the minutiae. Thank goodness for all the astrophysicists who are out there who are busily trying to make the cosmos available to us, help us understand it, and so on, because we are made in its image, not the way it looks necessarily as this huge star, multiplicity as well as galactic multiplicity, and the billions and billions of light years to try and get from one end of it to the other. We don't understand that. But I do believe that the shift that we're making now will only be accomplished well if we begin working on our own individual consciousnesses and go beyond ourself and kind of enter something bigger that in the book Master refers to as the we. We don't know how to do that. So here we have an idea. Here we have perhaps a notion of where we're going as a human race, but there is so much more to the picture. And I do think that looking at time in terms of huge packages is valuable, whether or not you and I can sit here and say, well, there's A, B, C, and D, and this is how it's valuable. We may not be able to do that, but it does change our perspective of the now. And the now is, the great ancients always said that the now includes the past and the future. And most of us haven't understood that. We just see this little piece of it. But I do think that Jose Arguelles's work with the Mayan calendar and really looking at time in these big packages really opened people's consciousness to seeing something about Earth that they'd never seen before. It's timelessness, it's eternality, and yet it's made of physical matter, so it's not truly eternal. It too will pass away at some point. The last I read was about 10 billion years from now. So probably you and I won't see that. But nonetheless, it's to begin thinking in terms that are so much bigger. This is how I believe we begin to stretch our consciousness to see more and more of what the divine is doing here. And so, there will be a lot of speculation. This isn't like we're going to get, Moses came down the mountain with a stone that had 10 commandments on it, said, this is how you're going to live. I don't think God's going to do that nowadays, because God is trying to come through you and through me and through all of humanity, as well as the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom. We must find the divine. It has a numinous presence, a presence that is clearly there. Many people are sensitive to it, but it's not a physical presence. So we can't reach out and touch it in the same way. And yet there are all these studies, on plants that say that when a person comes by with the watering pitcher, the leaf will lift just a tiny little bit toward the hand that waters it. So there's consciousness there. Is there some kind of recognition that doesn't explain very well in many of our lines of thought, but it's there and it's a mystery. And I believe that opening into this new age is really about taking on the mystery of the divine indwelling matter, coming right down to this level of matter, the phenomenal realm. And so anyway, I think Arguelles helped us see a bigger picture. And I think people that have really studied his work, or if you read his writing, he's such an interesting writer because he is in this huge picture all the time. And it was so interesting to me. He didn't live to see the 12-21-12 event that he had prophesied for years and years. But The interesting thing was, I think about the last 10 or 11 years of his life, he spent his channel, Paco Votan, told him, forgive. And so he pulled out all the highness political leaders of all times, and he spent hours a day, every day, just forgiving, forgiving, forgiving institutions, organizations, individual people, movements, all of that. And he was exceedingly dedicated to this. And I think it's really a good lesson for all of us. It's very easy in the times that we're living in to just point fingers and think that if we blame somebody, that's going to give us something, but it doesn't. All those people that are still trying to say who's to blame for COVID, Master said to someone, well, when you find that out, how's that going to change anything for you? You still have to create your life in the world in the aftermath of this event. And it doesn't really matter how that happened. What matters is who you are having come through it and what you have to give back as a result of having suffered in whatever way you suffered. And so I don't know. I think really this whole time is about all of us coming to grips with a much bigger picture than we normally live in. And so anyway, that's how I see Arguelles's contribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many times we have a microscope on our own lives,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
it's hard to make the lens bigger and look at the whole world and just instead of just our village, basically,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Very true. And I think that's even true at a national level. It's
Mm-hmm.
very hard for us to really understand what's going on, say, in China.
Yeah.
This society is just enough different from ours. And, most people point to the political situation, but that's just a tiny piece of it. Oh, it may be significant in very real ways. But the real heart of what China is its people. And it's the culture they have carried, the arts that they have participated in for millennia, and the wisdom that has come out of this and really every other vast organized culture is really important to us in terms of integrating what Earth is about. It's not just about the North American continent, it's really the whole world. And we do have a tendency not to really go to that big of a picture. And yet, I think we simply must going forward if we're going to learn to really live with each other on this tiny little planet.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, yes. So, how has humanity's relationship to time affected its collective evolution? And does shifting conscious change one's experience of time, or does shifting time change the parameters of one's consciousness?
Well, I'll get the last questions first. I think it's yes in both cases.
Yes.
Now, if you would ask me to prove that, I can't by empirical knowledge. But when you think about time, most people think only about time that's measured by the clock. I have an hour before I get to my next Zoom meeting, and basically I have all these things to do, and to see I'll allot this much for this, and so on and so forth. But
Yes.
seeing time in only this way is really oppressive because you're never going to get caught up. And most of us living in the 21st century understand that all too well. We get up in the morning and we feel like we're behind. There's something wrong with that picture because each day is a fresh start, or so we've been led to believe by some. But we only look at time often in a linear way. And whether people see it as moving, say, from left to right, here is the past and here is the future, or whether they see it moving from back to forward, back there is the past, in front of me is the future, it's all very linear. And that is very confining for not only for people, but for the experiences we have as humans on this planet. Now, we know why we do that because our planet moves around, it has this orbit and it turns on its axis in 24 hours, and that gives us one package of definable time. And so we maybe take that too far. But you see, there is another experience of time, which is much more vertical, or it's much faster. It's the kind of time people experience when they're on one of those moments where the creative energy is so high Maybe an artist can't sleep. He's got to write this down. Or a musician that can't stop until they get to the end of this piece. Something drives them. And while it should tire them out, often it rejuvenates them because they're in a different time frame. They're not running out of time. Because you see, vertical time doesn't end. And it is in vertical time that we align with the divine. It's where people, let's say people who spend time long hours in meditation or prayer or any of those activities that have kind of gotten pushed away for many people just because we have the pressures of horizontal time. These are very fulfilling when a person takes time to harvest their life, to really sit down and think, let's see, how have I used this much of my life? How am I better for it? How much goodness have I brought into the world? And how have I facilitated others somehow in getting on with this grand experience of what it is to be human? And so, given all of that, basically, you can't work that in to horizontal time. There's not room for it. You're sitting in the car in these big cities, you're sitting in rush hour. And while they call it rush hour, nobody's rushing. They're stuck. And then the frustration begins to build, and people begin two-timing. They're working on the computer while they're waiting for the traffic light, and it's busier and busier and busier. And if, Master said, if we had a mantra for this time, it would be more, faster, more, faster, more, faster, more, faster. And it grips us in such a way that's very confining. And we lose the spaciousness of consciousness that we can access in vertical time. So it isn't time that you can measure. It doesn't fit well onto a clock. But creative time is very powerful in terms of how it nurtures the individual and then what it produces for others as well. So I think what we need to do is really go back. Oh, you can't go back in time. But there was a time when people took the weekends off. They didn't have their job 7 days a week, and they spent time in contemplation. In fact, I remember, I was in the third grade, I think, when my teacher told me when I saw her as really old then. She probably wasn't as old as I am now, but she had been taught that the only thing girls could do, they could embroider, but they had to sit and be quiet. And so she was working on a doily, and she embroidered it to her skirt. And so when she got up, it was, but this whole thing of there were only very few activities. Why? It's to break that trance of go, 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 and to that effort we all have of beating the clock out of something. But I don't know anybody who's really beat the clock. Maybe a runner who breaks a record or something. But for the most of it, we just have this sense of feeling behind. So if we can open our consciousness to see, the Greeks had words for these two types of time. The time that you put on clock on your watch was called chronos. It's from where we get the word chronological. But the other, which was the artist's sense of time, and time is energy. How much energy does it take to do this project, to create this work or whatever? But that they called chronos. And they understood these two types of time much better, I think, than we do today. And so this chronos is what you stepped into not only to create, but to pray or to meditate or to contemplate your soul's mission. And this is what we're needing more of, rather than just feeling there's no time to sit with the soul and discern my mission. It is really about allowing myself to go free, really, of the shackles of clock time and get into a greater dimension of time. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it's a big topic, isn't it?
It's very helpful. And you might want to speak to this, but a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too, is that we're so driven by time, and it's time that can cause us anxiety. Running late causes us anxiety. And so we're dumping all these bad chemicals into our body while we're subscribing to time all the time. And, and people have to go to work at a certain time, and then they're finished at a certain time, and all those types of things as well.
Well, this really is it's an important question to really look at deeply, because this is precisely what activities like meditation address. I mean, all you have to do is really come into a quiet space for as little as I was reading something, some came across my internet today saying that if people just meditated for 12 minutes, their brain goes into a different cycle altogether and their body relaxes. And so but here's the interesting things: 12 minutes a day and people's fear responses go way down, because it gives us, that's the precious time where we settle into our own skin and kind of look at who we are in this amazing, but sometimes really confusing and often very hectic reality. And so if this, to get off that, what do they call the little wheels that the gerbils run on, those spinning wheels where they don't go anywhere. They get to exercise, but they don't go anywhere. It's just a lot of energy expended. And we have to discern really about how we want to spend our energy, because it's our life force, isn't it? And it is ours to decide how we will use it. We will all use it up eventually, but how we will do that really is up to us in many ways. And I know I'm generalizing here, and I don't want to say that this is necessarily true, say, of people who are living in Gaza right now, or in any of these war-torn areas where they don't have food, they don't have water, they don't have basic facilities. This is why I think meditating is so important for those of us who have the time to do it, because there's so many people who don't. All of their energy goes into just procuring a scrap of food for their children. And we don't know what that's like, most of us. But it's very important that maybe we dedicate some of our meditation time to those who don't have access to it. But I do think it is getting off the gerbil wheel that it's very hard to do, because there's a kind of compelling nature to that wheel once it starts spinning, to stay in motion,
Mhm.
and somehow to just disengage from it, even if it's only 10 minutes a day, is exceedingly important, I think, for the good of humanity.
It sure is. Unbelievable teachings that you're sharing with the audience. Thank you so much. At this time, would you like to call in Master Djwhal
It,
Khul? Would
now,
you?
most people
Would you?
call Master DK, so that's okay, and it's much easier for us of a Western
Okay.
bent to say. So just a
Okay.
moment, I'll get him. I'll warn you, there's nothing very dramatic in what I do. I just sort of trade places with him. So just give me a couple of seconds here. Well, good afternoon, Rhonda. Tell me how you're doing these days.
Well, I'm doing well. Thank you so much. And it's so lovely to be in your presence.
Likewise, because, we are all just different ways of revealing the divine, aren't we? I
We
do it my
sure.
way, you do it your way. It's very important what you're doing, because these are not the times when people will, as they did in the past, travel all around the world to sit at the feet of a guru who maybe isn't going to give them very much for all the time and energy and money they spent on getting there. Even though that was really, you know, in many ways, this century, the 20th century, excuse me, was a century of pilgrimages. People went all around the world to find the teacher that could open them to a greater and vaster expanse. And so, one of the things that I think is so important about the spiritual podcasts that are coming on the scene right now is that people get to meet many, many other people who are engaged in spiritual work, whereas they might not know of them without someone like you introducing them. And so I see this as a really beautiful act of service. And I want you to know that I support you wholeheartedly, and I bless your work. This is where I think humanity is going in terms of connecting with spiritual teachers. So it's kind of nice to be on the cutting edge, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you so much for that.
Oh,
That's
yes, you're very
wonderful.
welcome.
Thank you. What are the powerful creative forces of the two astrological ages and what that experience might be like to humans?
Well, it's very interesting that you should ask this, because if you go back a few years, back when I was coming through Alice Bailey, esotericism was very, very big. People belonged to all these esoteric little groups, and they were really important because they came out of the old mystery schools at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, where Saint Germain was very active. He would be in and out of a body all the time working with his students. But it was so different in those ages because his people would all come to their gatherings masked and cloaked so that they couldn't tell who anyone was. It was felt that it would be dangerous for them. But to get into his mystery school, people had to have the equivalent of a doctor's degree in medicine, a doctor's degree in science, both astronomy and astrology. They had to be the essence of a lawyer, a doctor of jurisprudence. It was very interesting. These were the qualities that people had to have mastered before he would even accept them. So clearly, it's a different time. And it came then from that, these esoteric teachers that came by the great teachers of mystery school, such as Saint Germain, right to humans. And then humans coming into the next late 19th and early 20th century got into esotericism. And this was trying to understand everything from the perspective of energy. And so people became aware of what have been called by many of the esotericists the 7 rays of creation. And so the first ray, and they're saying this, the legend is that when the source of all being put forth these energies, he did them in sort of a sequential manner. Now, that may not be true, but given life on Earth, it's the only manner that people really understood. So the first ray was this powerful causative energy. It made things happen. It was, well, proverbially speaking, the energy that moved mountains, whether those mountains were human institutions or whether they are literal physical mountains. But you remember, even Jesus said, talk to people about the faith of a grain of mustard, a seed of mustard. He said, if you had this much faith in you, as this little seed has, you would be able to literally move mountains. You would say to this mountain, get thee hence, and it would go. I mean, that was his terminology, but basically, think about that. And when you think of a seed of any plant, all it is utter faith, maybe a little hope, but the forces of nature are so powerful that maybe 1 gazillionth of all the seeds that are made actually get to root. I mean, now it's a little different now because we have greenhouses and people plant them and so on. But in nature, a tree may put out, a big tree may put out as many as 10 million seeds in a given season. And if 10 of those actually take root and have a life, it's pretty amazing. And yet, they do it. Some seeds found in tombs in Egypt that were hundreds of years old, maybe over 1,000 years old, have enough faith to sprout and grow even now. So it's this first ray energy that causes things to happen. Many people have sort of a proclivity for the energies that they work with. And sometimes you may recognize a first ray person as someone who always has to have his or her way. And they have a lot of that energy because they've got an agenda, whether you know about it or not. And they feel it. It's not something they've just made up. They feel it. There's that causative energy of saying, get on with this. And so the second ray, which balances the first ray, is called the ray of love and wisdom. So the first ray is associated with the color vibrant red. The second ray with the color blue. And this is a teaching ray. So any really good teacher is probably using second ray energy because they have this desire to help people through sharing knowledge. And that is a really loving thing to do. Teachers get a lot of grief, don't they? And so basically to have a dedication to that and so on. So we have all of these energies. The third ray is really sort of what holds the balance of ray 1 and 2. But the real power of the third ray, it's associated with the color yellow. And it is the energy whereby people appreciate what is, how things work, the beautiful side of things, They love to see how the arts influence people. It's not just the arts that are great. It's how does it influence people? So this third ray really is kind of a container for the activities of first and second ray, and it does it through the energy that you and other people know as appreciation. So when we come to the fourth ray, which is associated with the color emerald green, this is the ray of artists. I mean, this is really into the arts. It's called, and this is interesting, artists will recognize this. It is called the energy of harmony through conflict. Now, in some ways, we could say that plays out politically in some cases. But for the artist who's wrestling with an idea, no, that's not quite right. The conflict is all internal. How can I say this in a way I can express what I mean? Or how can this passage in my music score isn't quite right. How can I shift it? And they really draw upon this fourth ray energy, not only for inspiration, but it sustains them and creates different ways of looking at things. And so while it's a very exciting ray in some ways, for some people it tends to be, but the many are, you've heard people talk of the artist personality, where they're this kind of the falls on the manic depressive scale, where things are really good or they're really bad. But it's these two ends of the spectrum. And for the person who carries a lot of fourth ray, his or her job is to find the middle way, because it's not always obvious when the ends of the spectrum present. But all creativity really draws from ray 4. The fifth ray, which is associated with the color orange, is a kind of energy that helps understand how things work. Consequently, you'll see a lot of architects draw from fifth ray because they have to know how to put this building together. You see, or a lot of engineers. In fact, some people notice that some engineers are kind of flat from a personality. They don't have that ray 4 that is always upping the ante, and so they can be kind of flat. They just the facts, ma'am, as used to be famous. Anyway, so it's really concrete understanding of how things work at a physical level. But it's been important also for those who explore how space works, because they had to devise a rocket that could enter space and so on. So that's fifth ray. Sixth ray, and this is the energy that was predominant in the Piscean Age. In the beginning of this age, way back at the time of the Buddha, now, depending on how people see the Piscean Age starting, many people say it came about or it began with when Jesus was born. And I understand why they do that. But, energy isn't a kind of thing that just has a sudden beginning. You go out in space, there's not some line that the planet crosses and then we've gone from one age to another. It is a gradual process of shifting out of the energy field of one constellation into that of another. And so sixth ray was called the ray of devotion. And if you go back to, it brought about an age of monotheism. And some of that got started a little bit by the Egyptians in the prior age, because if you think about what the pharaohs had to do, it's incredible. They had to bring together all these many tribes that had little cults around their god. And so bringing them together was not an easy thing. So they set up this system whereby the pharaoh became the divine representative at a planetary level. This wasn't an easy task. There was a lot of bloodshed in getting there. But it then allowed for the Piscean Age to come forth. And I see Buddha as the first great teacher that's part of the Piscean Age, even though some astrologers don't date the age going back that early. So this age, if you look at the followers of Buddha, they were incredibly devoted because they'd never had anybody talk to them this way, explain how consciousness works and so on. And they were devoted. Oh, I suppose they were devoted to him because they loved him. They were devoted to his teachings because it made such a difference in his life. Well, roughly 500 years or so later, here comes Jesus. And basically, look what a teacher he was. And it's very interesting to see how the earliest of his followers were exceedingly devoted. In fact, they launched this age in the Western world purely on devotion to the master. But you know how things are when they come out of the hands of the divine and into the hands of humanity, things get watered down. And so suddenly religion wasn't as potent. Maybe it didn't seem as meaningful, or whatever. Or some of the religious leaders got involved in politics, and that kind of messed everything up. And we can count the failings all along the way, and that's something to do for another time. But if we look at what happened, we would say it was the evolution in some ways of sixth ray energy. It was its highest at first. And even then when Muhammad came, all of these teachers taught in such a way that their students were devoted to them. And it was truly heart energy. I know people look back today and say they enslaved themselves to these teachers, and I suggest that that came later, when there were teachers who wanted to be powerful and in charge of things. And they were usually human teachers, not spiritual teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this devolution of this sixth ray that's very interesting, because today we would say it has devolved all the way down to the energy of addiction. So it's not devotion. Devotion lifts one, expands the heart, opens the consciousness. What does addiction do? There's still the drive toward the source or the substance, but it compromises one. It makes people sick. They little by little lose all of their faculties and their abilities and so on. And so the result of these two are way different. But unfortunately, that's kind of what humanity did with the sixth ray. It's an indigo color, a deep purple color, which interestingly enough, if you go back to many monarchies, that was the color of royalty, wasn't it? And so interestingly, how did people think that up? They just caught the vibration of it and they saw it for what it was. And when kings and queens adorned themselves in deep purple garments, their subjects went, oh, because they could see something divine in them. Now, were all of them beneficent kings and queens? No. But the ones who were really did represent the divine. Well, now we're shifting out of the influence of the age of Pisces, moving into the age of Aquarius. And so all the energy is shifting. And what will guide or influence the Aquarian age is what is called the seventh ray of creation. Well, this is a really exciting type of energy. Its color is sort of a violet. In fact, those of you who may be familiar with the Saint Germain people, they have worked all these years with something they call the violet flame. It's sort of between a purple and a pink, a little bit more red in it than just a lavender color. But they use this in the form of a flame, and it's a very powerful thing to meditate on. And even today, particularly now as we're moving into the Aquarian age, I recommend people work with the violet flame. Put it in all your organs, put it in your consciousness. Spend some time every day sitting in this beautiful violet flame, letting it cleanse your aura. You see, the beautiful thing about it is the flame is a symbol. It's a symbol of a spark of life. In fact, when you talk about, as the esotericists used to, the monad is a spark of the divine that then involves until it moves into the soul level and then the physical level, and then even further down into the sub areas that are within any human consciousness. And I'm sorry, I'm really going quickly with this, but we're trying to do
great.
a big lesson. So this violet flame then, or this seventh ray energy, often I ask people to use it as a beam of kind of sizzling light and to shine it in areas of their light where something needs to be revealed in a good way. It's not to put somebody else on the hot spot for something you think they did wrong or maybe shouldn't have done, whatever. That's very egocentric. But using this seventh ray, it is a ray really of transmutation. And, there have been a lot of people use that term, not really understanding what it means. It's a kind of transformation that doesn't require a death. Other kinds of transformation do. You die to one state and you come into another state, or one level of understanding, and you awaken as a baby into the next level, and so on. And this is how all of the initiations, both solar and human, have been defined up to this point. Now, one of the mistakes, I think it was a mistake, maybe not, but the early people, the esotericists, in trying to describe the seventh ray, basically called it the ray of ceremonial magic. Now, a lot of people think it means you get ordinary magic, and it's different. when you step into the role of ceremony, you're stepping into that vertical time that Kathlyn was just talking about. You're stepping out of the world as everyone knows it and experiences it, and into a vaster realm of what is possible. Not so much what is, but what is possible. And this seventh ray energy is the energy that allows that to happen. And one of the ways, people who have been good manifestors for, let's say, decades now, they know how to use this energy, whether they know that's what they're doing or not, because they're able to kind of be in one area and then suddenly one way of thinking, perhaps, or in one collective reality. And they're able to kind of think themselves or see themselves in another reality, and it works for them. Now, many times they've tried to teach other people how to do this. There's all kinds of online courses on manifestation. And while there's nothing wrong with the courses, unfortunately, this piece about the energy has, I think, been missing. And so what happens is people take the courses and they go away disheartened because they've done the meditative practice and their lives don't seem to change. But what they haven't been able to do is to really see themselves in new reality. They can think themselves in what they'd like is for a reality, but if it doesn't seem like a reality, it's not going to manifest as one. But in using this kind of energy, I've noticed that my students who use it, there's been sort of an interesting thing where they're sort of thinking about something and, they have to go downtown in a big city today. It'd be nice if I could get a parking place right in front of the courthouse where I need to go. And all they do is think about it. And then they drive the car and they go down there. And funniest thing, there's the parking place. Somebody pulls out as they're pulling in. And that is a very concrete example of what we're talking about here. What we need to be able to do is move that skill of transmutation from the level of the parking lot to the creating a new reality for Earth and everybody on it. And so this seventh ray, I think we will see. In fact, I've noticed that many people who are in the realm of personal coaching or even psychotherapy are now instructing people how to do rituals. And you start with meditation, you start with setting an intent, and then you give something to it. I'm willing to give up this to get that. But there's a way then where you visualize and not just making little pictures, but really do it with your full creative awareness so that you project the self you experience now into another reality. And this is how we will get to that age, if we do, of love and light. It's not something, humans have to do this. I know a lot of people say to me, why don't you just make it happen? And I said, well, I don't need it. I already live in that state. I did this transition. You have to do it now. Because if I did it for you, you wouldn't know how. You couldn't pass it to another generation. And you might not truly appreciate it if you got it for free. And so, unfortunately, what's going on now is making this transition it's kind of like, let's say you hear one day that you can run your car on hydrogen. So you go to the petrol station, you go in, you tell the attendant, I've just learned I can run this car on hydrogen. Fill up my tank with hydrogen. And he says, no. We have to have alterations to the vehicle. And so this is what's going on right now. We're in the alteration stage of the vehicle, not only Earth, but each person. So as these energies come in, everybody's entire beingness has to adjust. This is true for your physical bodies. Right after Jose Arguelles's date at 12/21/12, as we entered 2013, something very interesting started happening. And, I have a fairly large group of students around the world. And within a year, 6 or 7 of them just in the US alone had died. And these were people that were young, had been very healthy, and nobody got it. But what was really going on was their soul self was recognizing this is going to be a really difficult transition for this person. And so many people got sick and had to undergo surgery, but they lived. They made that transition. But you see, all the chakras have to begin running on a new form of energy. And there was resistance it's a human condition, really, resistance to anything new. And so there was a time, and it's still happening to some extent, but it's not quite as, let's say, as dramatic as it was in 2013 and 2014. It seemed like people were, what did they say, leaving like a drove of flies or something. It's not quite true. But basically, these were people who were going to have a problem. And the soul said, okay, we can stay in this body and you can suffer for 6, 7, 8, 10, maybe 50 years, but you're not going to be able to get on with your spiritual work. Let's just drop the cells, create a new body, come in with one that is already attuned to seventh ray energy. Now, believe it or not, all the emotions have to shift as well. You have to do your emotional interactions with a new energetic format. And I think the reason, or one of the reasons, you are seeing so much anger today in the world, particularly in this continent, is that people haven't made that shift yet and they're frustrated by it. They know something's not working. They don't understand what's not working. All they want to do is get their way. And so they lash out with anger and sometimes vehemence. But this is a coping strategy where people who don't understand that they're going to have to shift, the mind will begin thinking in different ways. And even the way a person does his or her spiritual practice will be influenced differently by seventh ray energy than it was by sixth ray energy. Case in point was right after we made that shift in the December of 21. We got into 2013. And basically, it was very interesting because I had people who had been my students for years and come to me and say, Master, what's happened? Are you leaving us? I can't find you when I look for you on the inner planes. And I said to every one of them, that's because you're still using sixth ray energy. And I've shifted. I'm no longer in that paradigm to come to me and find me the way you used to. You've got to use a different energy format. And for the most part, by just saying that, people were able to do it. Some said, I need a practice. I said, all right. So you just see yourself with this beautiful stream of seventh ray energy coming down around you. So you're completely encapsulated in it. And you send your desire to connect right up through that, almost like it is a huge cosmic straw. You send your intent to connect through that, and it will find me. And so there were people who did it one time and never needed to do it again. There were some who maybe did it 3 or 4 times. But just in taking thought, in other words, what this says is that their body-mind configuration was amenable to shifting energies. When you get to people who are more resistive, it doesn't happen quite that easily. And this is why I think we're seeing so much turmoil and turbulence and mean-spiritedness going on all over the world right now. So anyway, it's a long answer, but that's so how people experience this and making this shift is going to be a little bit different for each person. For some, it's easy, and I remember some students that came in and they'd say, "Oh, Master, is this going to be easy?" And I could say, "Well, for you, it is. You never felt in sync with the Piscean age, did you? Because you came in carrying Aquarian energy and nobody recognized it. And they made you wrong about this and this and this and this. And it's people, and it was like the light came on. I said, this is your time. You're going to feel at home in this age in a way you never could in the Piscean age. That doesn't make the Piscean age bad. It just ran on different energy and accomplished different things than is going to happen in this new age. So basically, some came in sort of already wired for it. And the babies have been coming in, what's been called indigo children. This is a phenomenon where they're coming in wired for the Aquarian age, and people just didn't know what else to call it, you see. But that's it. Oh, now there are different names for it, but I can tell you that all of them came in with a kind of wiring that didn't fit. In fact, some came in on the autism spectrum because it was so jarring to come into a world with so much sixth ray energy. But sixth ray energy, people want to hang on to things, you see. And seventh ray energy says, let go, just let go. You'll be okay. And this is what people are trying to discover. So I don't know. I hope I answered your question. That was probably a longer answer
Oh, you sure
we're thinking of.
did. I just love this. In what ways could humanity shift under the influence of the Aquarian age frequencies?
Well, I think in the long run, Excuse me, I have a kitty over here scratching on his scratching pad. Anyway, in the long run, I think they're going to find themselves becoming softer. In the Piscean Age, in
Yes.
fact, just about everybody grew up with someone saying, try harder. You're just not trying hard enough. But especially to certain kids in school or whatever, you're just not doing your part. And sometimes that was true. But it was Lily Tomlin, I believe, back in the 70s and early 80s, who said, why doesn't anybody say try softer? And in a sense, that's really what Aquarian energy is going to help people do. You take thought of something, and if its time is appropriate, if its time is right, just your thinking about it is going to increase the likelihood of its coming into manifestation. And so when people can learn to relax a little bit and not try to force manifestation, as so many have tried in the Piscean age and been frustrated, to learn to think about it, give it your best energy, give it a boost with your thoughts and hopes and aspirations, and then turn loose of it and let the energy do the work. This is kind of a novel thought for most people because so many people who have accomplished well in life have really worked hard at it. And so it seems like that's how you get there. That's true for sixth ray energy. You see, think about it. You really had to prove yourself, whether you were a student of a Hindu master, a student of a Buddhist master, or a Christian. You really had to prove yourself that you were worthy to be called by these names, and that you were worthy of all the gifts that each tradition provided for you. Well, I think it's kind of why I think people began throwing off religion way back in the 60s, because they began knowing there's something not quite right about this. It isn't right for another human, maybe, to say what I have to do or what's right for me. It doesn't mean that was all bad, because everybody needs, and this is something that a lot of New Agers need to hear, is that everybody needs a reality check. And the check needs to come from someone who's maybe a little bit beyond your own paradigm, whatever it is. Because as you can see, particularly in the US right now, the US is really divided between what appears to be a political divide, but it affects everything. The people on the right don't eat the same food as the people on the left. They don't go to the same movies. They don't read the same books. I mean, there's just really a split right now. And it's not a bad thing, but it's really kind of interesting to figure out, how do we bridge this gap? And what I'm suggesting is you can't do it with sixth ray or Piscean energy. We have to go to a new energy format. The schism became so great under Piscean energy that a new energy is needed for healing. And so I think for much of what will go on for people, it is deep, deep healing. Many people are carrying wounds from the Aryan Age that go back way beyond the Piscean Age. That was a brutal age in many ways. And so this idea of fighting and taking captives and making people hurt, I mean, you can still see it. It's come all the way through the Piscean Age, even though it didn't originate there. But if you go back, let's say, to the witch trials in England and in parts of the United States, I mean, it was really about making those people suffer, making those people suffer. That'll change them. Punish, punish, punish. And you still see it in certain people today. And but this whole theme of punishment, really, I don't think it belongs in spirituality. In here in the West, and I think coming out of the Hebraic Christian tradition, it was seen as God was the punisher. And if you go back and read some of the Hebrew texts, you'll find that there are all these stories about where he brought all these plagues on people. Yes. He was punishing, punishing, punishing. And unfortunately, that's all some people have seen. And maybe they didn't get it right. I know it seemed that way because they couldn't explain why suddenly they had a year where the grasshoppers ate all the fields. So they thought, we must have done something wrong and God is punishing us. Or they couldn't understand the cataclysmic elements in nature, whether it's volcanic eruptions, whether it's unseasonable weather. Where England had a year where it never got much above freezing all summer long. And it was because there was a cloudy configuration, a lot of particulates in the air, and so on. But when you look at all of these things, people didn't understand it, and so they thought we're being punished. This is also true, my friends, with the notion of comets. Comets were feared. And a long time ago, in Galileo's day, and even somewhat before that, when a comet went over, it was believed that a prominent person would die. And so it isn't strange to see that people all feared them. And it is also not unusual to think that their belief in that caused it to happen. Sometimes it was prominent political leaders, but sometimes it was the patriarch of a family or the matriarch of a family, the person that kind of held it all together. And was it the comet? No, but people believed. So we have to look at how powerful those beliefs are. If we can believe collectively that we're entering a beautiful age because we as humans are going to create it, we're going to make it so. Then we have exactly the fuel we need for getting to some of those predictions back in the 60s where people would love each other's and they would put flowers in their gun barrels. And I like that one particularly. But basically, it's not going to just happen for you. You are the ones who are bringing it forth. And it's really important to know this. But you're not going to get punished if you don't do it right the first try. I think it's going to take a number of tries, but there's not going to be any punishing force. And see, one of the things when people saw the divine as the one who metes out punishment or hands out rewards, I think it was a great disservice to humanity. Because then, people started parenting their children. Well, if you'll clean up your room, I'll give you the cookie, or I'll give you this or whatever. And so they've been motivated by the belief that if they do things a certain way, they're entitled to a reward. But that has run amok a lot. And, we could count numerous ways that's true. So we have to kind of get rid of some of these notions about how the universe works, or how we could say God works in relationship to humanity. And so, there's so many different ways. In fact, since the 60s, many teachers such as myself quit using the word God because it brought up such negative connotations in people as the punisher, or the one that was exacting a certain kind of behavior or worship or whatever. And that really was all coming from humans. Now, granted, there were humans who said they were part of a great institution, so you had to listen to them. And in some ways, it was probably wise to listen to them because society could move forward. It wasn't total anarchy. But this is a new time, my friends. This is a new time. And each must rise to meet it with the offering of his or her own creativity. That is what is being asked of you right now. Not to be foolproof or not to kind of know how you're going to go about making this transition, but to have faith, not in any being outside yourself so much as to have faith in the process, to know that others, before you were ever a thought in your daddy's eye, achieved enlightenment and even ascension. They have done it. And that means you can do it too. Although from age to age, the process does look differently because people are different. It's very interesting to think that people should be subject in the 21st century to the same rules as were there in the first century when Christianity came about, or in the case of the Hebrew tradition, the law, which was given 3,500 years before the dawning of, I guess the current age. But basically, to think that humans have not changed at all is really a big denial. Why not embrace all the goodness that has happened in the expansion of consciousness and say, this must mean something. And it must mean something not only for me, but for everybody, that together we can create a world like no one has ever seen before. That is your calling. And I just want to support all of you. Some people are able to do this much. Great, do it. Others are able to do this much. Great, do it.
Yes.
And that is the process. of really exploring consciousness at this time. See, it's going to take you right into the consciousness of the divine, but you have to be able to allow for the fact that that might be possible. So do as the Sufis did. You know, if you read Rumi's wonderful poetry, his love poetry for the divine, one of them closes with this phrase: there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. And of course, what he was referring to was that the divine is in the ground. They made a practice of looking for the divine in every plant, in every flower, in every, you know, in humans as well. And the ones who got it knew that when they were with a lover, they were really loving the divine. It was just through this person. But what the real object of their love was something much bigger and vaster than a single human life, you see. And so these kinds of things, yes, we're going to a new age, but we don't want to throw out all the wisdom that came from this time or this person or this level of experiencing. We want to take it to a new level. And I see that is precisely being what this new age is all about. It is a remarkable delving into what the nature of consciousness is. And then whatever you find, you expand it. And I guess there you have it in a nutshell.
There you have it. Now, you've received some feedback from the book. Would you like to talk about that? How it's
certainly
changing people?
Kathlyn has received a lot of feedback, and it was very. I'll sort of give you my view on it. It's when I wrote that book, I was trying to do a couple of things. One is distill what the Piscean age was about, to help people integrate it. You know, if people can't integrate, particularly some of the heavier experiences, they're very likely going to repeat them again unconsciously, but they'll continue to do it. If we can put it in a vaster context, people can see, not you don't have to justify it, but you see how it came about, and you see where humanity missed the mark, perhaps, you know, where they suddenly didn't see the divine as in the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, but only in this tradition or in this ensconced leader or something. And that was a mistake. That doesn't mean it was not useful, because people learn things as a result of it. But basically, in going forward, this exploration of consciousness needs integration of an age that was so vast. I mean, look how much the population of Earth increased in, say, that 2,500 years. It's amazing. You know, partly people lived longer, but there were other reasons for that as well. And it was so exciting that beings who were not in bodies stood in line to get a body so they could come and experience it. And so, wow, we've got a big population to deal with. And you know, the only solution is not necessarily just die off or getting rid of people. There are other ways to do this by transforming consciousness. You see, when you really transform, you find you don't need some of the things you felt you need. You don't have to rely on food in the way that so many people do. Doesn't mean you don't like it or you won't use it, but it's not necessary in the way that most people think it is. Sleep is not necessary in the way that most people think it is, but you've got to expand consciousness to even understand that. So as we really look at when I wrote the book, it was really to help people understand what this age has been about, what the high points were, what the mistakes were. And then toward the second part of the book, we go into looking a little bit about what spiritual reality might look like in the Aquarian Age, what might be possible, and some tasks that humans need to do. They have to create a new mythology for the world, you see, and that isn't something that just happens in 5 minutes. So basically, that was part of it, but I wanted it to be a book that felt like a personal interaction with me for everyone who read it. And that's the part that I think kind of astounded some of the readers, and certainly Kathlyn when she began getting this feedback. You know, we've had people that have really felt that the energy coming off the page when they were reading it changed their life. Not just that they maybe moved into a space of deep contentment and a willingness to kind of just be with this process, even if it's difficult. More than that, some people had physical problems, amazing physical problems that they have since healed, even in some cases to the surprise of their physicians. And so there's that piece, but others would describe it as receiving Shakti in reading. Some big energy came into them and they were able to grasp a bigger picture. And maybe they couldn't sustain it, but when they came back to the book, there it was again. And really, that was my invitation for them to come into my consciousness and see this as I see it, because I do look from a little bit different perspective, you see. And so, anyway, people began giving this feedback. And the interesting thing was, there was a group of people who had served as proofreaders for this book who had a meeting. It was all on Zoom, but they began talking about it. This one woman who had really, to her way of thinking, a miracle healing, began talking about it. She said, when I pick up this book, she said, I can feel so sick. And so I start reading, and I don't feel that anymore. And so she talked about her experience, and another one talked about his experience, and another one, and it went on and on. See, they thought that maybe they were making it up, or maybe they were the only one that had that experience. But as they began talking about it, they realized that everybody was having not the same experience, but a direct experience of me. And those of you who know anything about Tibetan spirituality know that the power of a direct experience where the mind is out of it and you're just there with consciousness, not mind, consciousness, experiencing what is right before you, it has the power to awaken one into enlightenment in the very moment. And so basically people were having many enlightenment experiences, and that has gone on. I think Kathlyn gave the book to a friend of hers who's really not on a spiritual path at all, just to kind of see what would happen. And this woman has had a lot of physical traumas to go through and has been somewhat depressed for years. Well, the first time Kathlyn saw her, when she just finished the book, this woman was ebullient. Or now they say ebullient, don't they? They've changed how that word's pronounced. But anyway, this energy, she was just alive in such a vital way. Not really, no, she just said, my dear, you're the genius that I know. Anyway, thinking it was just a matter of somebody putting those words on those pages. But there was more to it than that. So anyway, that's basically the kind of the phenomenal piece that people have been enjoying.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Master Djwhal. It's been wonderful being in your company and listening to all the wisdom that you're partaking and sharing it with the audience. It's just wonderful.
Well, it is utterly my pleasure. I love humanity. You know, I love them all, even the ones who are making maybe big mistakes right now. Mm-hmm. See, I have great compassion for them because some people are setting up some karma that's going to be very hard to deal with later. And so my compassion goes out to all who suffer, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, whether they're on a power jag or feeling completely compromised by their own lives. Everyone suffers. And so this is, I guess, what makes everyone human. It doesn't mean, the Buddha said life is suffering. And so people have thought that meant everything in life is suffering. That's not true. But if you're in a human form, you will suffer. You will suffer sickness. You will suffer old age. At some point, you will die. And then there are all of those strange but emotional things that get going in life when you try to have a functional relationship. Sometimes it's not easy. And so you see all of this. And it just, I think, brings us to such compassion for what it is to be human. It's not easy, but it's very important. So know this, my dear, dear Rhonda, I love you. I bless you. And to the extent that you will allow me, I will help you with your mission, which is bringing new ideas of an Aquarian age to so many people. Thank you for that. I see it as a real service. I'll give you Kathlyn then. Well, hello again. Did you enjoy Master?
Just wonderful. People can use these teachings in their present day. It's going to expand their consciousness. And those who haven't experienced enlightenment yet, I can see that they're going to, through the words and through the work that's been done through you, Kathlyn.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's been a long endeavor. I've been at this, 42 years now?
42
That's a long
years.
time.
Yes.
So, yeah, it is.
And
But
the name And the
Go
name
ahead.
of the book is Whatever Happened
Whatever.
to the New Age?
Well, when we look back to the 60s, it didn't materialize as maybe we thought it would back then.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean nothing's been happening.
Hmm.
And Master says, well, toward the end of the book, the new age is right now. You're in it. You're
Yeah.
creating. And
Yes.
so for us to sort of embody that as not just a heavy responsibility, it doesn't have to be heavy, but it is our responsibility. Why? Because we can. We maybe haven't figured that out yet, but he gets it. And he holds that up to person after person after person in his interactions with them. We still do a lot of personal sessions for people where they call
Hmm.
in and basically they have 45 minutes to an hour with him alone and they can talk about anything they want. And that's something that's kind of gone out of fashion. There were a lot of people, a lot of channels doing that in the early days. But what's interesting really is that he's the one that didn't want to give it up. He said, no, it's very important that people have a connection because otherwise they're wandering around feeling unconnected in all the areas of their lives. And
Yeah.
he said, that's not true. They don't
Mhm.
know how much they're connected to each other. That's what we
Yes.
have to discover. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity to greet your audience and hopefully it's been helpful for people.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's just been awesome to be in your presence and to just learn so much in such a short period of time. It's just phenomenal. And so thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much. May you be blessed, my dear.
Thank you.
Mm-mm.
Thanks so much, Kathlyn.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for listening and being part of the journey with Nature of Consciousness, your host, Rhonda Grant. Theme song is composed and performed by John Park Wheeler.